Welcome everyone to Crush Cash Games, episode 15. Going to be playing some mid-stakes, more 2-4 no limit. We start off the action at the top right. We have an open-end straight draw. It was a limp pot pre. We checked our option from the big blind. I think that we can rule out all flushes, simply because most flush draws are going to bet in that situation. We can also mostly rule out jacks because the jacks are likely to bet, although it's not a given that they're just gonna always bet out when they flop top pair. Most of the time, though, I would say they have middle or bottom pair, and they picked up a heart draw to go along with their pair. It's always important to really think through what hands we can eliminate based on our opponent's actions. It gives us a very clear view of when to value bet and when to play a little more cautious and go into just a check call type of mode. A friend of mine told me a hand the other day where he made a flush on the river, and it was the fourth nuts, and he bet out, like, it was a really big pot. He bet out 3,500 or so and ended up getting raised all in for another 5,000. He was asking me how I felt he played the hand, and I said, based on the relative strength of your hand, you did have the fourth nuts, but the relative strength of your hand wasn't actually that good. I think that by betting the river with the fourth nuts, the 10 high flush in this instance, a lot of the smaller flushes are going to call you, but the bigger flushes are going to ship it. So a better line of action would be to check and then reevaluate really whether or not you're going to call based on the sizing on the river. If there's 5,000 in the pot and we check and our opponent bets like 4,800 in a spot where they can't really have two pair sets, we're really hard pressed to call. So always take into consideration, the relative strength of your hand. When we can eliminate sets and two pairs and flushes and stuff like that, it really makes it a whole lot easier to process the information and make really good decisions. Going for a limp raise at the top right. I've tended to notice that when players opt for 4x instead of 3x, my limp raise generally generates a fold. The hands that are raising 4x, in my opinion, are generally hands that are at the very bottom of their range, and they just want to pick up the $8. And most of the time it works because they rarely face resistance. And even if they do face resistance, it's in the form of a limp call, in which case they still go into the flop with initiative and are able to win pots based on being in position and having and showing aggression. Getting cold flatted at the bottom left with our queen 10 suited is not an ideal situation from the big blind. They have a range that pretty much has us crushed and dominated, and we are out of position, which just kind of makes it not a very good situation for us to continue piling money into the pot with a c-bet when we just completely whiff and have no equity. In a lot of those spots, I tend to just give up when I have no equity, when we're likely to be dominated and out of position. Opting to flat ace king off versus an under the gun raise. I actually will not 3-bet ace king off versus an under the gun raise every single time. I think that when we flat, we actually give ourselves a little protection against squeezes, because we're certainly not going to be folding ace king 2 squeezes. And if somebody squeezes and people call in the middle, then that just creates a situation for us to pile it in with great equity. Sort of I know it looks a little silly, bet calling with ace high there. I think that once the preflop raiser checks, the small blind is likely to have missed the flop and likely to give us credit for it being 4 ways. So the only player that we have to get through was the short stack, and essentially hope that he doesn't flop a pair. If he does flop a pair, we have 20%, 25% equity. And he can actually be, he can shove worse. He can have a flush draw and straight draws and stuff like that where we're actually ahead. So once we bet half his stack and he decides to ship it, we're pretty much committed to call with ace king high at that point. Pretty unfortunate that he had a blocker. He had us just absolutely smashed with king 8. Pretty interesting check call at the top right with king 10. I guess I only felt that he would be betting his random 5s and his random draws. So by checking, we kept the hope alive that he could be bluffing with a draw and inducing a bet that way. At the bottom left, I think that we bet the flop. We raise pre, we bet the flop, we bet the turn. Now how do we size the river for value? It's really interesting because a lot of players, if they're in callie mode, are going to expect us to rep the ace on the turn and to generally continue repping the ace on the river, simply because they don't have a ton of aces in their range. Most of the aces that they do have are going to be 2 pair, and they're going to raise the turn. So once they check call the turn, their range is capped at jacks and draws. We flatted in position with the ace jack off, hoping to outplay or do something post flop. We didn't really get the greatest of boards, and our opponent didn't show much aggression, so we couldn't really capitalize. But we ended up being in position and getting to realize our full equity, which is never really a bad proposition. The 6th seat at the bottom left looks to be a pretty weak player. I would expect the 1 seat to be isolating pretty light, so we're gonna come right back at him, get in his face, and all that's of course foiled by the limp call of 48. Now we find ourselves out of position again with a pretty weak hand. And now it's a little interesting. We flop top pair. Most likely the best hand. How do we proceed? this small bet, I feel, is going to get us action. Now, what on earth? That's a pretty unfortunate cascade right when I'm right when I'm trying to make a decision. What kind of hand is going to min raise us here? A lot of times it's a hand that wants showdown cheaply. I'm inclined to think that oh god. Yeah, I mean it's hard to flop a set, first of all. So it's hard for him to have a set. We shouldn't fold the turn to the min raise simply because he can be raising worse hands and not getting it in on the river, so we get to showdown. He's a very weak player. He does have king queen type hands in his range, but we're just getting such a good price to peel at that point, and we bet a third of the pot, which one of the goals of betting a third of pot was to induce a raise just like we got. Just kind of unfortunate that they did have the goods. And going back to the queen ten of clubs hand, I think that now we know our villain didn't necessarily have us dominated, and we weren't in as precarious a situation as we may have thought. But that's just one of the things that happens when you just get more hands on a player and more data, more information. You're able to use it in the future to make better decisions. One seed at the top right looks to be a fish. Limping in the cutoff is just not a play that is in many winning players' repertoire. We're raising 4x, 4 value. We expect to get called. Another cascading incident. This actually happens with some of my videos that I recorded, and I've hopefully fixed the problem from ever happening again, but it's just super annoying when it happens. Kind of interesting dynamic that we timed out at the bottom right hand table now. I feel like that makes the 2-seat more inclined to continuation bet, knowing that one of his opponents is timed out. We can rep all 2 pairs, all straights, all everything. So not a terrible spot for us to raise, to try to maybe fold out some better hands and get some worse hands like a 5-6 or 4-5 or 6-8 to potentially call us. As it was, again, we are set magnets. We ran into a set over set situation where, you know, I don't think I was getting those 2 hands to fold no matter how hard I tried. Pretty interesting just thinking about the fact that the bottom set opted to just flat the continuation bet. They were slow playing on a fairly coordinated board, once I raised it, I guess once I raised it and it got re-raised, they really don't have a choice but to ship. I wouldn't be feeling great about it though, quite frankly, even with bottom set, because you have to figure that the pre-flop raiser is not going to be bet 3-betting his overpairs. So he either has some sort of draw that he's just going crazy on and thinking that I'm full of it, or he's flopped a set or straight. I don't think their equity is as great as you might imagine. Again, like I was just talking about the relative strength of hands, I don't think their hand is relatively all that strong. Appears as if we're losing at all 4 tables. That's never a good thing, but it happens. The thing about playing poker for a living and playing lots of poker is you become accustomed to, you know, getting punched in the face and getting knocked down, and you just gotta keep getting back up and trying to do better. Yeah, we got looked up by pair of trays at the bottom right after we bet on a coordinated board. Just not really much going our way at this part of the video. Hopefully things turn around. Does appear as if we have some good games going though. Pretty annoying squeeze with the 9-7 suited. If they were a full stack, we're for sure coming along. Unfortunately, they're not a full stack. Limp-raise at the bottom right did not go our way. We hadn't 3-bet over 28 hands. He hadn't 3-bet over 34 hands. So what can you do? Like I said, this does not appear to be our day. Going to be peeling the Jack-10 suited versus the isolator and the limper. The hand plays very well, even out of position. Unfortunately, got 3-bet before our turn. And I would assume that 3-bet is pretty strong versus 2 short stacks. It was a small 3-bet, which is just basically begging for action. I guess there's only 1 bet left, so he should be checking all of his overpairs, and that is just I have no idea what he's doing there. I think that's just a poor play. I don't know why you would be inviting action from short stacks who are more than likely going to be getting it in with a hand that can't call a half pot bet on deuce tray 4-10. Even ace king should be calling, so he doesn't have ace king. At best he has something like king queen suited. Another limp raise with the ace-5 off at the bottom right. Let's see if this one turns out okay. Getting a $138.27 stack is going to be good news for us. Unfortunate that, you know, the big blind flats our 3-bet cold, but they're playing so many hands. I'm still going to continuation bet because their range is weakened by them basically being labeled a fish. all good, competent players, when they flat a 3-bet in that spot, like, the thing you have to take into consideration is the under the gun guy is still live. So even if you have, if you say, oh, well, I have the odds to flop a huge hand with 7-8 suited. First of all, I have Jack-9 off. It's going to be hard to get my stack when I have a range that isn't comprised of all, premium quality hands. So when you peel with pocket 4s, pocket 5s, 7-8 suited, like, that's the first thing. That's the first problem with it. The second problem is going to be that the under the gun raiser is still live, and he for sure has aces, kings, ace, king, all hands that are going to 4-bet and squeeze us out in his range. So that's why good players are going to be, when they flat a 3-bet, and I've actually gotten away from just flatting 3-bet because I feel like it gives away the range of my hand a little too often. Like, sometimes I would cold flat 3-bets with like ace queen suited, pocket 10s, jacks, 9s. Now I go ahead and 4-bet. I just add those hands to my 4-betting range instead of just cold flatting. Because when you play a hand face up and your opponent really knows about where you're at, and he knows that he has your range theoretically dominated, it's just very hard to play out of position against him profitably. Pretty good turn card for us at the top right. Top pair with the straight flush draw. We didn't bet it because we don't think that the 5 seat is going to bet. As it turns out, we gave him a free card, but I don't think the free card hurts us that much. He hit a king, but there were only 2 kings he could hit. He can't hit the king of clubs or we make our flush, so not giving away too much, letting him draw to 2-outer and hoping to get a bet. The 3 seat in this hand with the aces has only raised 2% of his hands, which means that when he does raise, he's likely to have a strong hand. I would think he's got tons of overpairs here. The king on the river is kind of unfortunate just because we have ace king in our range and he knows that. So I think that betting even half pot on the river is going to be a mistake. I think he's going to fold. As it turns out, even betting whatever I bet 40% of the pot still made him fold. We called a min 3-bet with the Jack-9 suited, and lo and behold, flop 2 pair. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why you don't min 3-bet pre, even with a super short stack, and let somebody realize their equity pre-flop. Not to say that what he did was absolutely horrendous or he should have shipped it or anything like that, but just saying, like, a lot of times you hear these stories about, I did this and I re-raised him and he called with the Jack-9 and of course he flopped 2 pair, like it's some sort of terrible bad beat. But the reality is he 3-bet me minimum and gave me 3-1 pre-flop, and I knew that he probably had ace king plus, like hands that had me dominated, but I opted to try to realize some equity and flop 2 pair, and that's that. Sort of interesting if the button raises at the top right, just because he never raises pre-flop. like I said before, even with a hand as strong as ace queen, hands that are seemingly very strong for the situation versus this particular opponent, they aren't as relatively strong as one might think. Instead of min opening, I feel we can probably 3x the button and still get as many peels from the 3 seat at the top right as we're going to get from min opening. He's going to fold the flop more often than not. So 3x is probably a more profitable play. Deuce tray 5 at the bottom right's a board that I don't expect the 3 seat to be betting out with his bluffs. So when he does check, I believe he mostly has no equity, you know, just overcard type hands, and he's gonna fold. So the only player we got to get through is the 1 seat, who I feel, you know, he's folded to 100% c bets. He feels okay about about giving up pots out of position. He's not going to put up much of a fight if he doesn't have anything. So it's a very high percentage bet. Four-way action in the big blind. We did call a raise with Jack 10 off. It's I don't think we have much of a choice, but it's still very a little light for me. And now see, we have a spot like this where, you know, we're getting 4-1 with middle pair and a gut shot. We're out of position. The biggest problem is, you know, obviously we could be drawing dead, but also if they do happen to have queen 10 or something like that, we're in bad shape. With a king 8 at the bottom right, we opted not to raise the turn simply because of his super small bet. We don't think he has much of anything. Probably not even, he probably has 0 equity against us. So we want to induce that last bet on the river. And we do raise him just because we don't think, because he never has his beat taking that line. And we're just hoping to get some sort of spike call. But the main thing to gain from that particular hand is that looking at his bet sizing and his sizing tell, we want to get that extra bet out of him on the river. He doesn't know that it's futile, that we're never folding, even if it is. And that's something that can really make or break you as a poker player, getting those little extra bets here and there, inducing bets from your opponents. So we fought the nuts, limping with the tens. Probably going to get floated on this board fairly often. I feel like we should have check called the turn, but also check calling kind of gives it away that we have a 10. So I thought check raising would look a little bluffier and maybe get us played back at a little lighter. Tens at the top left. Great spot, should be opening 3x to get him out of position with a dominating hand. Opted not to bet the turn. This guy folds very often to continuation bets. He could very well have a queen, but we just took a little pot control line. As it turns out, he called us with ace high. Very interesting river card at the bottom right. Yeah, kind of an annoying river card because it just makes us lose to so much of the hands that we were beating, and we're out of position, so we can't really do very much about it. If we were in position and he made some sort of blocker bet, then we could turn our hand into a bluff and raise. But being out of position just makes it so much more annoying. Well, I want to thank everybody for watching this video all the way through. I hope you learned something. I hope that my videos are improving on a week-to-week basis. I hope to get better and be able to provide the best content that I'm capable of. Looks like we're going to be limp raising one last time at the bottom right table. And it goes through. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed, just click the little button. I very much appreciate it. Take care, everybody.